And welcome back, everybody, to the BaseLINE podcast. I am your host, Ben Newman. Now, obviously, we are not in our studio today. We are in Marshall, Michigan, as a family member of mine has come on the podcast, and we are going to be talking about his college wrestling coaching career. He coached 33 years at Olivet College over in Olivet, Michigan. Please welcome my special guest, Jare Klein.
Thanks, Ben. It's a pleasure for me to be with you and talk a little bit about the old Olivet College wrestling team and program.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, Jared started off, wrestling has been a major part of your life, but when did you start wrestling?
Well, it's really funny because in South Bend Central, I went to in Indiana, we were a powerhouse in wrestling. And I went out with my friend, a kid by the name of Larry Claxton, and I thought I could whip his tail. But for some reason, when it came down to it, Larry was better at wrestling than me. So I was always second rate, but I was always helping the wrestling team out and sort of in a managerial position when I wasn't wrestling. And I thought, well, maybe as a sophomore, I'll get a chance to wrestle. And Larry will move up a weight, and I'll still stay at 98 at that time. That was the lowest weight. Well, Larry did make it to the next weight, but there was a little farm boy that came in and to South Bend, and he beat me out. He waxed me badly, but he was the first four-time Indiana state champion, and so I didn't feel too bad about that. So I really didn't wrestle in high school, other than in practice and played around. But I did have one match against a 165-pounder. They were just starting up at South Bend, John Adams. And they didn't know anything about wrestling. And I can remember when I went in to wrestle against them, I felt, 103 pounds, I think I was as a sophomore. I went in and he grabbed a hold of me, picked me up, and all of a sudden I saw stars. And he took me down, but I wiggled out of it, and I knew how to control and ride him and get away from him, so I wound up beating him. He became the principal at South Bend, John Adams, years later, and I bumped into him, and he remembered me, and we talked about wrestling. I says, do you remember when you started wrestling? He says, yeah, I got beat by a twerp like you at 165 pounds, and you were just a midget. But that's how I started my high school career. Then I went on to Western Michigan. I checked that out because I wanted them to get a wrestling program going. Oh, yeah, we're going to get it. Well, finally, in my senior year, they were going to have a club team. And so I helped out a ex-football coach, Roy Wheats was his name. And he sort of let me take charge of the program, and I was working out with the kids, and yelling at them and doing all this stuff that I thought you should do. And then, of course, I graduated from Western in 57. Well, I took a job here in Marshall in 57. That was my first year with the idea I wanted to start a wrestling program. That's what I told the superintendent, Bruce Gray, at that time. We'll get one. Well, I became an assistant football coach. I was a JV basketball coach. I coached tennis. But it wasn't until about 55, 56, somewhere in there, I finally got the program started. Lo and behold, I had student teachers from Olivet College. And the athletic director and the football coach would come periodically and check on them. And he came to me one day and he says, Jerry, he says, how would you like to coach wrestling at Olivet College? And I said, hey, yeah, great, geez, big time, going to college. Division. And at that time, I wasn't so sure about Division I, Division II, Division III, what it all meant, about the scholarships, etc. So anyhow, I did take the job. And the student teacher that I had, his name was Al Nagy, he got my job and became the coach here. But I did start the program here in Marshall, and which is going pretty decent still to this date. And Olivet had wrestling for about, I think, 4 years before I got there. There was two different coaches, and I don't know, they might have had about 18 or 20 matches, and this was a not too good of a program at that time. But it was just starting up, and I took over, and when I in all my wrestling, in all my career in coaching, in anything I did, even outside of the coaching, if I was just being a freelance coach somewhere when I was in college, helping little kids in baseball or softball or whatever it may be, I was always a winner for some reason. But I got to Olivet in my first year, 68, 69. I had 6 kids on the wrestling team. We went, I think, 0-13, if I'm not mistaken. 0-13. And I had 6 kids. and I lost one kid, and then I lost another kid by a broken ankle over Christmas vacation. So I only had 4 kids on the wrestling team. And after Christmas, I went in and I says, guys, I want to tell you something. Anybody wants to quit, you can quit now. I says, but if there's one guy that wants to last, stick it out. We're gonna make a program here at Olivet. And one kid, Roger Doherty, as I recall, Roger Doherty said, Coach, we're all gonna stick it out. So there were 4 kids, and I says, we can't win any matches. I says, even with 4 pins, worth 5 points apiece, we're not gonna win any matches. So we went through that year, but the only thing that really happened, Ben, was in that year, out of 7 teams that were wrestling in the MIAA, we finished 6th. Boy, that was big time, 6th. The next year, we finished 2nd. Mm-hmm. And the following year, well, I don't know, we won 9 championships in a row. And I think, 11, 10, 10, 11, I can't really recall. But then we had, in this process, we won 47 straight matches before we got beat by the University of Kentucky, which was a Division I team. And the Carr brothers were wrestling. And Jimmy Carr was the youngest Olympian they ever had. And but he was a freshman at that time, and he chewed one of our kids up badly. But we only got beat to him by 2 points. And in the locker room, before the next match down in Ohio where we wrestled, their coach came in and says, boy, Coach, he says, I can't believe it. We thought we were going to tear you apart. You're just a little Division III team. We're Division I. Well, that made me feel good. It was nice for the kids to hear that and all that stuff. But we went 47 straight, and we lost to Kentucky. Mm-hmm. Then we went on to win 53 more straight. We won 100, I think it was 101 out of 102 matches, or 100 out of 101 matches. We had victories. But and things built up from there. But the winning part wasn't really what I was all about. I don't know if you have any more questions for me, but I could go into what wrestling really meant, what it was really about. It wasn't winning and losing. Yeah, that's important. You're in the game to win, but that's not the most important ingredient you're going to get for all of the lads that you work with. It's what you can do to make them a better person. They'll struggle, in practice. You get your tail whipped, and there's other days you'll whip everybody and you'll think you're king of the hill. But it's the values that you get out of it: the sacrifice, the dedication, the perseverance, the confidence that you can maintain yourself when things aren't right. And there's something that was really important to me. In my latter years of coaching, I'm going to say my last 10 years or so, I always had a lot of kids that didn't have a good family background. When I say that, they had a good family background, but they might have been missing a mom, they might have been missing a dad, or there were some hardships. And after we got home from our away meet, I'd always be at the door from our locker room, or the gym they just tore down, by the way. They call it the pit. But I would always give him a hug and maybe a little peck on the cheek, And I had this James Richardson, who wrestled at Michigan State, helped me for a couple of years. And he took a job over at Grand Haven. And when he left, we were talking about some things. And he says, Coach, he says, I like the way you coach. He said, I like the way you do things. But he says, I just can't take that little hug and that little kiss. But I told the kids I love them. Mm. And in some cases, that might have been the first time in a while that somebody had told them they loved them. And it was a genuine say. Well, when James took that job over in Grand Haven, which was always had a good wrestling team, he called me up one day and he says, Coach, he says, I have to apologize to you. He says, remember what I told you about how I thought that was sort of dinky? You giving the kids a hug and a kiss and telling them you love them. He says, that's the greatest tool I have in my wrestling program. He says, thanks a lot. But and on the phone, when the kids call, and I call them for some reason or other, I always end up saying, Dan, Joe, Bill, I love you. And they'll say, Coach, I love you too. And anything I get in through the mail, it's always, love you, Coach. There's a little plaque I got up here. I don't know if you can see it or not. I could bring it down for you if you wanted it, but let me just read it for a moment. It says, it's for the 220 Jare Klein duels for Jare. Love ya on there. And they gave those plaques out to the teams that were there that placed just this past year. But that's one of the little things that the kids always rush to say before I do. Coach, love you. And to me that meant a lot. And the winning and losing is great. Oh, I enjoyed it. There's nothing better. But the values that the kids got out of it, when they come back and say, "Hey, Coach, thanks a lot. You did this for me," or without you, I wouldn't have done it. I said, "Do what? What do you mean you wouldn't have been without? You wouldn't have been anything without being involved in our wrestling program." Well, Coach, you don't know what you did for me. There were certain things where you got on my back for loafing or not going to classes or getting on me or setting me down and saying you had to do it this way or else, but it made a difference in their life. That's the thing. It made a difference in their life. That's the greatest things I got out of coaching. The winning is great. And I say, the winning is great, but knowing what the kids got out of it when you didn't even realize what you were doing for them. And I think that's the way teaching is. I don't care if you're just a teacher of math or teacher of science or whatever. You always touch people's lives without knowing it. And I think, to me, that's one of the greatest things that coaching has done for me.
Jare, you just mentioned it a little bit ago, but when you first took over the program, you guys were not very good. You didn't win a single match in your first season. The first 2 seasons went 8-22 before you really turned things around. Changing a program can be really tough. So I guess going a little bit deeper into that, what kind of lessons did you learn from those first 2 seasons to really help improve that program?
Well, before I could get to that part, after that first year, President Riesmeller called me to his office. I went into my office, and the secretary says, "Dr. Riesmeller wants to see you." It was after the season. And before school, in May, before school was going to be ended. And I said, "Oh, yeah, I wonder what Dr. Riesmeller wants with me." I got a little bit uptight and a little worried because I think it was 0-13, 0-14, I can't quite recall. But I said, I might be getting fired. So I went in there very quietly and, on my tippy toes and just all worries. I already had 3 children, and one was coming, one was on the way, 4th child. And I walked into Dr. Riesmeller's office, and he always smoked a cigar, and he was standing there. Hi, Mr. Coach Klein. I said, "Hi, Dr. Riesmeller," and he, there's a little bit of simple talk going on, and all of a sudden he hands me this envelope with a letter in it or something. He says, "I just wanted you to have this." I said, it's I'm being fired. So we tied a little more cheap talk about something I can't recall. And because this was 1960, I went there 68, 69. This was in 69 in May. And so at the end of the little bit of talk, he says, "Well, are you going to open that envelope?" And I said, "Well, when I get home." And I didn't want to have an accident going home, not being steady. But he said, "Well, open it." So I opened it up. There was a little note that said, "Great job," and a $2,000 check. And the reason for that $2,000 check was I was supposed to make $10,000 at Olivet or at Marshall High School that year if I would have stayed. But I went to Olivet College and took a $2,000 cut. And he says, "I remember you. I remember what was holding you up for a while." Because I turned the job down 3 times before I went. But I thought that was a highlight. And I said, Olivet has done a lot for me. I did my share for Olivet, but Olivet really took care of me. And I just can't forget that. But how did it come about, and what did I do? I don't know. I think I probably went out and I officiated. I was officiating wrestling beside football and basketball while I was still teaching classes and coaching, and I would recruit by officiating, and it was legal. But I didn't talk to a lot. I'd know who the kids were. I'd see who they were, etc., etc. And I'd send them little notes or talk to the coach and see him, because the rules have changed from the time 68, 69. So that I picked up a lot of wrestlers that way. And generally, as a coach, you generally go to visit other people, or visit other schools, and you talk to the schools and get the kids out of class and all that stuff. But I was just doing it through officiating, and I think we just picked up some kids, and they weren't all champions, but I think I made them believers, and maybe I made a believer out of myself too. That and I said, in my life I was always a winner at something. I had a winning attitude, and I don't know if I instilled that upon them, or it's hard to say. But just kept working at it and just bringing kids in, and kids who wanted to wrestle, and they believed in what we were doing. I don't know if they believed in me, but they believed in what we were doing, and success came about. And little old Olivet College, wow. I'm going to tell you this story, which happened just about 4 years ago. There was a wrestler from Michigan who was an Olympic champion. He wrestled at Michigan. He was Olympic champion in Greco-Roman. Well, when he graduated from Michigan, he took a job at this on the Michigan Highway Department, not state trooper, but county sheriff. That's what it was. And he used to pull up into our drive at Olivet College, and he'd come and work out with us. And the kids on campus, who wrestling was pretty big on Olivet College. At Olivet College. And the kids thought maybe I got in trouble, or our wrestlers were getting in trouble, because they'd always see this car coming in. But he was working out with us, and he eventually went on to coach the Olympic team after he won his Greco-Roman championship. But about 4 or 5 years ago, they had a meeting out there. Olympics were going on. In fact, it was 4 years ago. Olympics were going on, and they had a meeting out in Los Angeles. Where the heads of the Greco program was coming up, and the Greco, we aren't real strong in Greco-Roman. That's upper body wrestling. You can't tackle the legs or anything else, but it's all upper body. And they were talking about, we've got to do more to get Greco a solid footing here in the United States. We have too many, we just don't have enough good Greco wrestlers. We got to start putting these places all around the country. And they said, where do you think we should go? What should we do? Where are some places we could go? And of course, they were thinking University of Minnesota, which Minnesota has good Greco, the high schools, etc. Washington, state of Washington, California, here or there. And this Frazier, this guy's name was Frazier. He says, what about Olivet College? Now, you'd think that committee would say, Olivet College? I'm going to use a cuss word here. What the hell is Olivet College? Well, they all knew. They knew Olivet College. Here we are. Small little old Olivet College. We got an Olympic Greco-Roman training center there. Still, it's going on today. And so, I say little old Olivet College, but we've had our success there, and nationwide, and people know us from Division 1, 2, 3, because we've wrestled those teams. And the current coaches are doing a fantastic. Brandon Brissett is doing a fantastic job with the program still today.
You mentioned it a little bit ago, but you did talk about those 47 consecutive wins from 72 to 74 and the 54 from 74 to 78. During that time as well, your team went 97-3. Only lost 3 games during that, 5-6 year stretch. What do you think made that stretch of time so dominant?
I think I had some good wrestlers. I think they worked real well. I think they blended as a team. Wrestling is an individual sport, but in order to win as a team, you have to have more wins than losses in a match. But I think they supported each other, they believed in each other, and they worked. There were times when they were perfect, but I'd come in there and grouse at them and tell them, they just weren't tough enough, and that they weren't given enough. The old stuff that coaches tell you sometimes, but I just think I think it was the togetherness, and how that came about. I can't say I had anything to do with it. I don't know, but they hung around together. They supported each other, and they had each other's backs. And if somebody got beat, and say it cost us a match, that would, because the fellow, if he would have won, we would have had a victory, but he got beat, so the team lost. But they would never never say, well, if you would have won, we would have been, we'd have still had this match going or something like that. But they didn't. I don't know. I just think the environment was just great. And it's hard for me to put a cap. I could say, hey, I was a great coach. But I don't think I was a great coach. I think I just had good wrestlers who believed in what they were doing. And they gave to Olivet College and the wrestling program and the athletic program and the school everything they had, and they were proud. They were proud. They had a lot of pride. And maybe that was a key to it. Pride. Having pride.
Now, Jared, going off of that, I mean, you've won multiple MIAA championships, multiple NCAA regional championships. How were you able to really maintain that success throughout your 33-year career?
Boy, that's really hard. That's really hard to answer. In a way, I could say, I was blessed. I could say I was blessed, but I just think the lads I brought in, the work they put out, they believed in me, and maybe that's the thing. They believed in me. No matter whether they were a winner or loser, I had kids that weren't very good wrestlers that came in and became really good wrestlers. And I had other kids who came in and were really good wrestlers that couldn't handle our program. But I just think they believed in the program and what they were doing. And I think as you look back and the success that was there year after year, they wanted to build upon it. They wanted to be one of those teams because, boy, there were some years that I don't know how many undefeated seasons we had, or maybe lost one or two matches a year, and those kids wanted to, hey, if they could do it, we could do it and maintain.
Going off of that, like you said, I think you had a lot of belief in your players, and the feeling was kind of mutual with your players as well. Talk about your athletes and some of the notable players that helped drive that success.
Well, Roger Doherty was number one. Because Roger Doherty is one of the four guys that says, we'll all wrestle. We'll stay with you, coach. Mm-hmm. And to me, I always had a picture. I had a picture of Roger, that I had, it was a pose in wrestling. And I always had it in a wrestling room. And the kids would always say, as the years went by, I said, Coach, why do you have this picture of this guy? And I would tell them, I would sit them all down and tell them the story. Of course, when I recruited, well, I didn't tell the story when I recruited him, about the 1 and 4 and all that stuff. But but I would tell each year because Roger was more important than me, because he's the one that kept things good. He's the one that gave me life. He gave me a real good feeling when he says, "We're all going to stick it out, Coach." I think Roger was one of them, and then we had kids who qualified for the nationals who became All-Americans. And that, whether it was a first, we had one national All-American, Danny Pantelli was a 3-timer. In fact, there's a funny story with Pantelli. I had his younger brother, Mike, too. He was a 3-time All-American. Placed second, third, or fourth, somewhere in there, but Danny won it all. Well, they had another brother named Joey Pantelli. Joey was being looked at by LSU when they had a program down in that Southeast Conference, Oklahoma State, Michigan, etc., etc. And they had about 6 or 7 children in that family. And Mr. Pantelli was just a worker. It wasn't a professional, but he was just a hard collar, blue collar worker. And they wanted me to have Joey come and wrestle with Mike and Danny. And Danny was going to sit out his senior year. He could wrestle, he could sit out but still go to school and wrestle unattached somewhere, but just exhibition matches or something. But I told the family, I says, if Joey's going to get a 4-year scholarship somewhere, you can't afford to have him come to Olivet. I could kick myself in the tail for saying that because Joey was a 3-time All-American at Michigan. But the thing was, it was a family situation where I could, and Joey, if Joey wasn't having good practices at Michigan, Dale Barr would kick him out of practicing. He'd wind up working out with me. He'd sneak over and work out with his brothers, But anyhow, those are little things that are really neat. But those are the guys that sort of set the standards. Dave Lebrecht was an All-American for me, and just a wonderful, wonderful young man. They've all become successful afterwards. And in fact, Danny was involved with when they had the bombing of the buildings in New York. He was at the Pentagon, and he's the one that came out with the flag and they had this picture because he was a Marine, you know. But he was one of them. But those, you know, all those kids that became All-Americans, and I can name a lot of them, and I'm shortchanging some because I only named a few of them there. But I think they set a standard, and you know that standard they set was they were proud to represent wrestling in Olivet College and their families and themselves, but they were never braggers. And I think that's the thing that the kids looked up to. They liked the way they presented themselves. And that made that true love, that true binding of our program.
Jare, I'm happy you mentioned the Patella Brothers because they were actually two people that really caught my eye. Like you just said, Dan and Mike. You know, Dan is second in career wins. That drew my attention. And both had perfect seasons, and both are first and second, respectively, in most consecutive wins in a season. Can you talk a little bit more deeply into the hard work of those two?
Well, I think they had a good high school background. I don't think Danny was a state champ, or you know, I think he placed, and Mike did too. And of course, Mike's son is nationwide now. He's one of the best freestyle wrestlers in the nation, and he just graduated from Michigan 2 years ago. And but anyhow, I think they came from a family, as I said, it was a big family, and I think they had a good background on discipline from their dad and mom. Their dad and mom were just beautiful people. Oh gosh, I just love them. They were always so nice when they came to the wrestling meets, and I said the dad was a blue collar worker, okay, and that's the way Dan and Mike were. They didn't take anything for granted, but they worked. They worked. And you know, there was one time when Danny was gonna drop wrestling after his junior year. He had just won the national championship in his junior year, and he was gonna drop it. And he came to my office and he says, "Coach," he says, "I'm quitting wrestling." And I says, "Why, Dan? What are you talking about?" You know, of course, I was shocked. You know, God, I could wrestle like this. And he says, "Well," he says, "you don't give me enough recognition." I said, "What?" He said, "Well, yeah." He says, "You know, I'm your best wrestler, you know, on national championship, and you don't really give me your best. You don't give me a lot of credit." I said, "Well, I want to tell you something, Danny." I said, "I know you're my best wrestler." I said, "So does everybody else. But you know, if I would just say that you're my best wrestler and practice every day, you wouldn't work. You wouldn't get to another level because you'd have all the accolades and all the pats on the backs, and you'd be content to what you just did." He thought about it, and probably it was about a month later, he was down there. He says, "Coach, you're right." He says, "You're right." I had another wrestler do the same thing on me, and he's a junior high principal over at Lowell High School right now. Dustin Sahaki is his name, but he did the same thing because he was a good wrestler. But you know, I just said, "Hey, you know, everybody knows how good you are, and I don't have to cite you out in front of our kids." Because if I did that, you're going to be content and you're going to be satisfied, and you're not going to work anymore because you've had success. So, but that, you know, but they were just good workers, you know, and it's really hard for me to look back at kids, and I can remember these kids, you know, I can remember going through practice and all that. I can't remember any of them that really were slackers for me because we had such a small room. It's amazing. I can't even remember how we did it. It was a small room. We'd have 40 to 50 wrestlers in there, alternating. How could I pick out the 10, 20 best wrestlers out of all of them? But they stayed the route, but we did it somehow. But it was, you know, I have no answers for them on some of that stuff. But they just believed in the program, and they did a good job, all of our kids. And they're all champions.
Out of the players with the most wins in program history, 9 out of the top 10 came from your time as a coach. What do you think made your coaching style so successful?
You know, when I started talking to you, I said I had good coaching in South Bend Central. Mm-hmm. I think, and I was with the coaches all the time. I was a football manager for 4 years, And I said, even though I didn't wrestle, I sort of was manager for the wrestling team because I wanted to travel with them. I wanted to be with them all the time. And I think being around the coaches from South Bend Central, who were good coaches, I think I picked up a lot of things that I'm not even aware of, or how I picked them up. And I think, and South Bend Central was a good athletic high school in all sports. And so, I don't know, something was ingrained in me by being with those coaches. They really took care of me. They'd come and pick me up and take me to school sometimes because I was doing a lot of things for them, taking her laundry down to the cleaners, or stacking up all the football stuff in the room after the season, and doing all these things, And I was being like, they were training me to be a coach, doing all these little things. And I think I picked it up from there. And I can't tell you why I've been successful, other than the fact I believed in what I was doing. I believed in the kids, and I believed that I could win. I believed I could be a winner. How? I don't know. How it came about, I don't know. The good Lord blessed me. I know that.
Now, going off of that, I mean, I've never wrestled before. I don't really know how a wrestling practice would go, but, in your mind, what would you do during a practice to really ensure that your players were prepared for a match?
Well, we'd put them in different situations. Get them in different situations, like maybe letting somebody, I'm the starter. Okay, I'd put a couple of our backups on top of a person laying down and tying them up and making them get out of it, and tying them up in different type of moves. But I think it was just a day in, day out offensive, defensive schemes that you go through. You work on escapes. Well, they don't do this anymore. Wrestling has changed, and I'm not real happy about it. It's too much upper body wrestling, takedowns, and let him go. And before it was take the person down, hold them down, break them down, set them up for pins. And when you're on the bottom position, you get up to your base, your knees and hands, and make a move to escape from the man who's holding you down. But we worked on, we drill on the breakdowns, we drill on the escapes, we drill on the takedowns, all of that every day, and add new. At the beginning of the year, add new techniques, or sometimes later on in the year, if some teams were using something new that we weren't accustomed to, how do we get out of it, or how can we have success against it? So I think it was just a repetition, day after day, breakdowns, takedowns, escapes, and knowing how to use time.
Now, Jare, with all the success that you've had in your career, what are some of your favorite moments that you've had in that 33-year stretch?
Well, there was one year, and we were wrestling Manchester down at Manchester, and they had a real powerful team. They were a Division III team, and we were decent. And we went down there, and I figured we were going to get beat. I never went into a match thinking we're going to win it. I always say, we got to win this one. We got to win this weight. Got to win this weight. And I let some of the kids know, hey, we got to have you. We got to have you. And but Manchester had a much better team than we had, and so we started out the match down there, and I had a 18-pounder. That was the lightest weight at the time. I had an 18-pounder out of Charlotte that quit at the end of dropped out of school at the end of the semester. He was undefeated. And I put another kid from Homer, Scotty Saylor, in at 118. He was a backup, but he wasn't as good as the lad that left. Well, Scotty got a win. That was a big plus. Okay, mm-hmm. Whoa, good, because I figured there would be a 6-point, a pin there maybe, but Scotty came through. And the next match we came through. And the next match came through. And then at 142, 142 I think it was, and I could be wrong on this weight, but we had a lad out of Eaton Rapids, and he was getting beat something like 7-0 going into the third period. I said, oh, God. And we needed him as a win, too. And getting beaten, maybe they were going to get a major decision, a 4-point play out of it. if not more. Well, he comes back and winds up winning. He winds up winning on a pin. Wow! So I left I left my chair, and the kids were sitting there, and I went and sat back on away from them. I just couldn't believe what was happening because they hadn't won a match yet, and we're blanking them. Well, it got to the point where we had them beat so bad that they didn't even wrestle their heavyweight, who was a real good heavyweight, because they didn't want to take a chance at having him get beat by our kids who were just having one of these days where you just couldn't figure out what'd you feed them today or what'd you give them. But they were just unbelievable, and I can remember that match, and I couldn't say anything, and I'm a talker. I couldn't say, and I'd always go the pluses and the negatives going home. They'd listen to them and for a while before they go to sleep. A lot of trips, but that was one trip I couldn't say a word. I was so tied up inside and so pleased with what they did. I couldn't talk to them until we got home, and I just told them I loved them. I just couldn't believe the job they did, and it was that now I know that they're capable of doing more than what they have been doing. But that was one of them. And I think having Danny Pantaleo take the stand at number one was a great thing for little old Olivet, because even Olivet, our school sizes compared to a lot of Division III schools is there's a big difference. They've got over thousands, 2,000, and here we're about 800 at most of this time, 800, 900 when I'm coaching.
Jerry, in 2001, you decided to walk away from collegiate coaching. Is there anything in your coaching career at Olivet that you regret or maybe would have done differently?
I don't think so. I mean, I as I look back at the way things went from a 0-13 or 0-14 first year to all the way moving through, and the success that the kids brought about in the program, what more can I ask for? What more? 9 straight championships there, just running off things. And, in my third year when I think when we came in second or something like it, or second or third, I can't remember which year it was, we had a coaches meeting, and one of the coaches said you're cheating. You're doing illegal things. And I said, what, winning? But they were used to Olivet just losing match after match after. I didn't have that many matches, but they were used to piling it on and being. But all of a sudden, Olivet changed, and so we were doing something wrong. The only thing doing wrong is the other schools let Olivet hire me. Maybe, I don't know. But that was sort of a. But no, I can't think of anything I would do differently. Basically, because if I did, maybe I would have had the success as a coach and as a mentor for the kids. And I really like to think that I was a better mentor than a coach. And I think that I had a couple kids tell me. So I met Danny Pantaleo was one of them, and the Sahaki kid that I mentioned. Time and time again, I've heard on the phone recently and all that. It says, Coach, I wanted to win for you more than I wanted to win for myself. I said, wow, that chokes you. How can you say that? Coach, that's the way I felt. And boy, I got goosepimples on that one. But anyhow, those are the rewards, not the wins. Those are the rewards.
Yeah, going off of that, talking about some real awards for sure. You're a part of multiple different Hall of Fames, but in 1994, a whole 7 years before you would even retire from Olivet, you got inducted into the Olivet Athletic Hall of Fame. What did this moment mean to you?
Well, it meant that I was established at Olivet, that they loved me at Olivet, that they thought I was doing a good enough job at Olivet to be put into the Hall of Fame. In fact, when you go to the Hall of Fame, if you stopped into the new Cutler building, the athletic building that they have out there, there are more wrestlers in the Hall of Fame than other athletes. And that's because of the success that they've had. But as I say, it just made me feel good. It made me feel appreciated, and especially after starting out the way I did with with a 0, whatever it was. I don't want to remember it, but I know it was a double digit, 13 or 14.
You finished your 33-year career with 569 wins, easily the most in program history. But, along with that, you currently sit as a coach with the 3rd most career wins in the entire NCAA, no matter the division. What is it like to really be recognized as one of the most winningest wrestling coaches of all time?
What makes me feel good is the fact that it happened at Olivet College, and a small school. Mm-hmm. And up until a couple of years ago, I think the coach from Johnstown, Pennsylvania, or somewhere, Division II school. He's been coaching for about 40-some years. He just bypassed me, and I'm the winningest coach in Division III, and the 3rd winningest coach in Division I, II, III, and NAIA. But I didn't win them. It was the kids that won them. It makes me feel good. Yeah, I'm honored. Big deal. But it makes me feel that I've had some success in what I was doing. The career that I chose and the profession I went into proved to be good for me. It paid dividends in nice accolades that you receive from other people. But there's a lot of people that don't, right here in Marshall that don't know what I've done and all that. And but it's nice when somebody recognizes you and says, hey, he was really a good coach. But what is a good coach? Is a good coach winning all these matches, or is a good coach doing something for the kids that have been with him and that wrestle for him? That's the payback. And I have so many, at one time I had 75 kids that were involved in coaching wrestling here in the state. I had them in Arizona, I had them in Georgia, I had them in South Carolina, Illinois, Texas. They were either head coaches or assistant coaches, and all of them didn't go in the field of education, but they were, they were coaches. And there's a lot of them are there, and they're sending, a lot of them still send the kids, good kids, to Olivet. Why? Because they realize what they went through. And yeah, they could go to bigger schools, and some are going to bigger schools now, but we still get a lot of those kids, and that's sort of neat. And they had a picture taken at the state tournament about 5 years ago. They had all the Olivet College wrestlers who are now coaching report down at gate 15 or something. There must have been about 60 or 70 kids down there, and they took a great big picture. And they generally don't do that at the MHSAA state meets, doing that, announcing that kind of stuff, because that's not what it's about. But they did, and so I got to be with them. We got a great big picture of that, but it's sort of neat.
You mentioned the appreciation that you felt over the years from Olivet, and I don't know if you mind me grabbing that picture right there.
Oh, no, quick. That's sort of neat.
In 2008, it was announced that they would be Olivet College would be naming their wrestling room the Jare Klein Wrestling Room. After getting this, what did that mean to you?
Well, when they were building that program, I was around there and all that stuff, but no one ever said anything to me about it until the building was put together. And they called me up and they says, we want you up there. And all of a sudden they take me back. I mean, I knew where the wrestling room was going to be, but then they have it on top of it, the Jare Klein Wrestling Room. And wow, that was a heart stopper. That was sort of neat. They gave me that to take home with me. That was from the architect's situation there.
It looks like a beautiful building.
But it is a nice building. The fellow that gave it was wonderful that he did that. But yeah, that was a proud moment. That was a proud moment.
I'm sure.
And it's a lasting moment. I guess that's sort of neat.
Jare Klein, maker of champions, a nickname given to you sometime in your career. But how did this nickname come about? And in your opinion, how do you think you fulfilled the nickname maker of champions?
I think probably where it came from was the championships that we won, because and you look at the history of Olivet, they haven't had a lot of MIAA championships. They've had a nice program with golf with the late Gary Morrison, but they still didn't have. But they didn't have the recognition or the bulk, as I say, the bigness of it. Football, basketball generally are your two biggest sports, in baseball, but wrestling is wrestling was the big sport at Olivet. Why? Because they were always winning, and the other teams weren't. As athletic director, I sacrificed some of my budget so that we could help the other teams out. But I don't know how they come up with that. But I just think it's just the fact that we won these championships, and that the fact that we were winning, and somebody put a label on it or something like that, and made me look good.
Sure. Now, finally, Jare, last question, but with everything that we have talked about today, for someone to have a dream of becoming a coach or wanting to wrestle in college or professionally, what advice would you give them?
I would say be patient, be around coaches who love the sport or any sport that you want to go into. Follow those sports, follow the people who are involved in it, and ask them questions. Don't be afraid to ask them questions. But I think when you go to just college, you're going to go prep to be involved in physical education and coaching and teaching, etc. I think you get a good background right there on what to expect, but you have to make contacts. That's why I say you've got to ask people about things, talk to people about situations, so they can give you. And you've got to attend camps, you've got to attend conferences, and see what's going on to be on top of things. You got to go into something which you have a liking for, and if you have a liking for it, you're going to get more involved in it, and taking part in activities more, attending camps, even as a coach. But see how they do things, see how they teach, how they coach. I think my personality in coaching is made up of a lot of different coaches. Stealing something from different coaches, a smile or a wave or a cuss word or anything that somebody else does that catches your eye, that has some kind of meaning or will help you with your profession and what you're doing. So that's how I view that.
Absolutely. Well, Jare, thank you so much for coming on. I really appreciate it, and it was really nice to be able to talk about your Hall of Fame career.
Well, Ben, I really appreciate this time with you. From the time I knew you when you were just a little scraper to now, this is my pleasure. You've done a nice job, and I really appreciate you being over here.
Well, thank you. That means a lot. But that's going to wrap things up for us today, guys. Thank you so much for tuning to this episode of the BaseLINE podcast. Thank you to Jare Klein for coming on and talking about his legendary wrestling career at Olivet College. Is this your first video with the BaseLINE podcast? Make sure to subscribe because it really helps me out, and I just really appreciate the overall support. If you guys enjoy the music as well, always make sure to go check out Hidden Harmony, link in the description below. And with all that being said, guys, thank you again so much for tuning into this episode of the BaseLINE podcast. I'm your host, BaseLINE Newman, and we'll catch you guys next time.